I've always really liked that phrase, everything you want deeply is because, on some level, it already belongs to you. It's a thought that brings an incredible, almost overwhelming amount of comfort when you first hear it. It feels like a warm embrace for a tired soul. But over time, as I sat with that idea in the quiet moments of my own life, I noticed something subtle, yet incredibly dangerous, about how we naturally process it. Whenever I used to think about that phrase, I realized I was still viewing it through a flawed lens. I was still throwing it far out into the future. I looked at it as a distant promise, a beautiful, soothing confirmation that one day, eventually, in some vague, undefined tomorrow, I would finally get to live out my biggest dream, and I didn't realize how much that specific mindset was actually working against me. It was keeping me stuck. By always placing my fulfillment on a horizon that moved further away the faster I ran toward it, I was creating a constant, painful gap between who I was today and who I desperately wanted to be. This habit of waiting to arrive was keeping me from realizing a profound truth, that the true, raw essence of any dream doesn't belong to tomorrow. It belongs right here, in the present moment, today. The truth is, the only real distance between you and what you want most in this life is not a lack of luck. It isn't a lack of money, it isn't a lack of influential connections, and it certainly isn't a matter of time. It is simply your state of awareness. It is your current state of consciousness. Think about what you carry in your heart right now as you listen to my voice. It might be a vision of a creative project, a career shift, a healthier body, a restored relationship, or simply a state of deep, lasting peace. If you look at your current circumstances, your bank account, or the daily limitations of your life, that dream probably feels completely impossible. You might not even know where to begin, and the path forward looks entirely blocked, yet at the exact same time, you find it impossible to let that dream go. There is a quiet, persistent voice in your soul telling you, against all logic, that you are meant to experience this reality. I want to tell you today that this inner drive is not a cruel joke. It is there for a reason. Providence never plants a deep, authentic desire in our soul without already preparing the exact resources, connections, and pathways required to bring it into the physical world. The blueprint for its completion is already woven into the fabric of your life. But how long it takes to show up in your physical reality, how many months or years you spend waiting at the gate is entirely up to you. We often hear people say, everything happens in its own perfect time. It's a beautiful sentiment, and it contains an absolute truth. But I want to invite you to look at that concept from a completely different angle today. Why does everything happen in its own perfect timing? It is because universal timing is not measured by a mechanical clock on the wall, nor is it dictated by the pages of a calendar. True timing is determined by capacity. It is the exact moment when you have developed the internal maturity to receive something without losing yourself inside of it. This is about psychological and spiritual weight. The more prepared you are mentally and emotionally, and here, please understand, I'm not talking about having a perfect resume or a flawless business plan. I'm talking about your internal state of awareness. The faster your outer reality begins to shift and align, you must become the kind of person who can sustain the blessing without being crushed by it. If a massive wave of success, responsibility, or wealth hits a structure with weak foundations, the structure collapses. The time it takes for your dream to arrive is simply the time it takes for your internal structure to mature. To understand this on a deeper level, let's look at a classic historical narrative. Consider the ancient story of Moses leading his people out of captivity in Egypt. They had been enslaved for 400 years. They witnessed incredible, undeniable wonders. They saw the sea part, they walked through on dry land, and they were physically set free. Yet, they spent 40 long years wandering in a harsh, barren wilderness. If you map out that journey geographically, walking at a completely normal, average human pace, that entire trip should have taken only a few weeks. At most, even with a large group, perhaps a month or two. How does a journey of a few weeks turn into 40 years of dust struggles circling the same mountains and watching an entire generation pass away in the desert? It happened because the wilderness was not a geographical problem. It was a psychological and spiritual one. The timing was not being held back by the rugged landscape. It was being held back by their level of internal readiness. A promise can only manifest when you have developed the character required to hold it. If it arrives a single day before you are ready, it won't fulfill you, it will ruin you. I am fairly certain you have already experienced a microversion of this in your own life. Think back to 5, 10, or 15 years ago. Remember something you desperately, passionately wanted. Maybe it was a specific romantic relationship, a particular job offer, or a business deal that fell through. You prayed for it, you cried over it, you stayed awake at night begging the universe to hand it to you right then and there. And it didn't happen. You felt rejected, forgotten, and heartbroken, but then time passed. You grew, you learned, and you gained wisdom. And years later, looking back at that exact situation with a mature perspective, you find yourself breathing a massive sigh of relief. You look at how that person's life turned out, or how that company went under, and you think, thank goodness I didn't get what I wanted when I wanted it. If that door had opened back then, it would have completely derailed my entire life. The delay was not a punishment. It was protection. It was the universe acting as the guardian of the right time. And that right time is always dictated by the readiness of your awareness. When the people were pulled out of Egypt, they were carrying a heavy, invisible baggage for 100 years of deep, generational conditioning. For centuries, their ancestors had been taught exactly how to think, act, and feel as captives. They knew how to survive under a master, but they had absolutely no concept of how to live as free citizens. And so, the most fascinating and heartbreaking thing happened. The moment they encountered the vast emptiness of the desert, the moment the path became uncertain and difficult, they actually started missing their time in captivity. They openly wept and complained, saying they wished they were back by the cooking pots of Egypt, even if it meant being enslaved. When you read that on a page, it sounds completely irrational. How could a human being miss a place where they were beaten, degraded, and stripped of their dignity? They missed it because the wilderness demanded something they had never been trained to give: absolute trust and personal responsibility. In captivity, their choices were made for them. It was miserable, but it was predictable. In the desert, they had to step into the unknown every single day. They were physically free. Their physical chains had been broken and left behind in the sand, but their minds were still locked tightly inside the gates of Egypt. They were free on the outside, but internally they were still prisoners of their old habits, their old fears, and their old conditioning. There is a timeless, ancient text that outlines a profound mission statement: to bring good news to the poor, to proclaim liberty to the captives, to recover sight to the blind, and to set the oppressed free. When you hear those words, it is easy to look at them through a purely material lens. But this is not an economic or a political manifesto. It is a psychological map of human liberation. The poor does not just mean people with zero balance in their bank accounts. It refers to the poor in spirit, those who are internally bankrupt, wandering through life with no sense of meaning, no connection to their purpose, completely detached from their higher self. The captives are not those sitting behind physical iron bars. They are the individuals locked inside the prisons of their own minds. They're captive to toxic habits, captive to destructive behavioral patterns, captive to old family traumas, and enslaved by a constant, paralyzing fear of failure. They repeat the exact same relationship mistakes, get into the same arguments, and fall into the same traps over and over again, completely unaware that they are holding the key to their own cell. The blind are those who suffer from a lack of truth. It refers to people who are blind to reality because they have spent years wrapping themselves in comfortable lies. They build elaborate, false narratives to justify why their lives aren't working out, why they can't change, or why everything is someone else's fault. They choose the comfort of a lie over the sharp, healing pain of a truth that would force them to grow, and the oppressed are those who are being crushed. not by an unfair boss, but by their own internal dialogue. They are oppressed by severe anxiety that keeps them awake at 3 a.m., oppressed by a heavy cloud of discouragement that strips away their vitality, and oppressed by a relentless, brutal inner critic that tells them they will never be enough. It is an internal tyranny that we inflict upon ourselves. If we are completely honest with ourselves, we do the exact same thing the wilderness wanderers did. We spend our mornings asking for our lives to change, begging for a breakthrough, demanding a new chapter. But the moment the universe responds and says, "All right, the door is open, now take a step into the dark," we freeze. We hesitate. We make excuses and we pull our foot back. We choose to stay in a life that makes us deeply unhappy simply because that unhappiness feels familiar. It is predictable. We know exactly what it feels like. It is strangely comfortable to wake up every day and complain about the economy, complain about our job, complain about our partner, or participate in the same uninspired, cynical conversations with our friends and neighbors. It becomes a psychological second skin, and the deep, hidden truth of human psychology is that our subconscious mind will always choose a familiar hell over an unfamiliar heaven. We are terrified of the unknown. We want the freedom of the promised land, but we want a detailed, guaranteed map before we are willing to pack our bags. But history and faith show us a completely different model of movement. Consider the story of Abraham. He received a very simple, direct command: leave your country, leave your relatives, leave your father's house, and go to the land that I will show you. Let's really break down what that meant in practical terms. He didn't get a beautifully illustrated map. He didn't get a breakdown of the terrain, a list of resources, or a legal guarantee that the new land would be safe and fertile. He wasn't shown a step-by-step route. He was given a direction, a voice, and a requirement for movement. Abraham only received the instruction for his second step after he had the courage to fully execute the first step. That is how the grand design of life operates. You will never be shown the final destination, the grand finale, or the complete 5-year plan while you are stubbornly refusing to leave the place where you currently stand. Stepping out toward your true purpose is very much like driving a vehicle through a dense, heavy fog at midnight. When you turn on your headlights in a thick fog, you cannot see the entire highway. You can't see the city lights 30 miles away. You can only see about 3 to 5 feet directly in front of your bumper. That's it. But if you have the courage to actually drive forward into those 3 feet, an amazing thing happens. The next 3 feet open up, and then the next 3 feet. And by simply consistently moving through the small patch of light that you can see, you eventually navigate your way across an entire mountain. That is what true, active faith looks like. It is moving forward without external guarantees. And when you decide to live this way, the people around you are going to think you have lost your mind. They will call you irresponsible, reckless, or unrealistic. And they have every right to think that way from their perspective. You have to realize that people who are mentally living in captivity will never be able to comprehend the vision of someone who is actively marching toward freedom. You cannot expect people who love the comfort of Egypt to validate your journey into the wilderness. The call wasn't broadcast to the whole neighborhood. It was whispered directly to you. When you begin to step out of the norm and build something completely different, the world will initially treat you as if you are foolish. But once you succeed, those exact same people will look at you and call you a genius. So, how do we practically bridge this gap? How do you change your internal state of awareness right now, in the midst of your daily stress, your bills, and your routine, so that you stop pushing away the very things you are trying to attract? It requires a deliberate, daily retraining of your focus. It isn't about reading 50 self-help books in a week or completely isolating yourself from society. It is about a consistent micro-practice. And to give you something tangible, I want to share the exact exercise that I personally practice every single night before I close my eyes to sleep. It is a tool I call the Awareness Checklist. Understanding the concept of manifestation or spiritual alignment in theory is easy. You can listen to an audio program or watch a video for 20 minutes, feel a sudden rush of inspiration, and think, yes, I get it, everything is internal, that temporary high is simple to achieve. What is difficult is maintaining that high frequency of appreciation and fulfillment throughout a chaotic 12-hour day filled with traffic, difficult emails, and unexpected problems. But it is that exact day-to-day consistency that actually reshapes your life. The purpose of this nightly checklist is to systematically prove to your subconscious mind that your dream is not trapped in some far-off future. It is designed to show your brain that you are already living the true essence of your vision right now. When we look at our massive life goals, we tend to get overwhelmed by the scale of them, which instantly throws us back into a state of lack. To fix this, you have to break your massive dream down into its absolute smallest atomic components. Let me give you a very personal example. One of the deep, core desires of my life has always been to share messages that help people on a large scale to speak, to write, to create content that shifts perspectives for thousands of people. For a long time, because I wasn't standing on a massive stage in front of thousands of people, I felt like I was failing. I felt a constant sense of distance and frustration. So I changed my approach. I broke that grand vision down to its smallest daily essence, and I created an item on my nightly checklist called Helping People. Every night before I sleep, I review my day and ask myself some very basic questions. Did I take the time to listen to a friend who was going through a tough moment today with my full, undivided attention? Did I offer a sincere, thoughtful word of encouragement to a colleague? Did I create a piece of audio or text that might help someone see their problems differently? Did I take the time to do something kind at home, like helping with a simple chore, just to lift a burden off someone else's shoulders? If the answer to any of those questions is yes, I physically or mentally mark a check on my list. What changed within me was the realization that the core intention behind listening to a friend at a kitchen table or helping with a simple chore at home is exactly the same energy as standing on a stage in front of 10,000 people. The underlying essence is contribution and service. The only thing that changes between those scenarios is the scale. But by checking that box every single night, I train my brain to understand that I am not waiting for my purpose to begin. I am already living my purpose today. I don't need to wait for a massive event to feel useful and fulfilled. Let me share another item from my personal list, experiencing abundance. Most people believe that to feel abundant, they need to see a specific, massive number in their bank account or own a luxury vehicle. But abundance is an internal orientation. It is a way of seeing the world. If you can't see abundance in a drop of water, you will never be able to manage it when it arrives as an ocean. A few years ago, I found myself needing a very specific outfit for a formal family event. My sister actually owned the perfect piece, but due to a sudden change in her travel schedule and a massive delay with the postal service, it became practically impossible for her to mail it to me in time. Instead of falling into my old pattern of frustration and stress, I sat down, cleared my mind, and said, "Look, I would really appreciate having that specific item, but I trust the process. If I have to wear something old that I already have in my closet, it's completely fine. I'm taken care of regardless." What happened next was a beautiful lesson in how reality flows. Right before she headed to the airport for her trip, my sister completely changed her route, drove 30 minutes out of her way, knocked on my door, and handed me a bag. When I opened it, she hadn't just brought the one outfit I asked for, she had packed two completely different options for me to choose from, just in case one didn't fit perfectly. That night, when I sat down to do my checklist, I didn't just mark a standard check next to abundance. I marked a double check. I realized that the universe hadn't just met my basic need. It had provided options, care, and effort that I hadn't even asked for. A few days later, I took one of those items to a local tailor and elderly grandmother in our neighborhood just to get a quick adjustment on the hem. Not only did she do a flawless job with an immense amount of care, refusing to charge me her full rate, but as I was leaving, she reached into her closet and handed me a beautiful, handmade scarf, saying she felt it matched my style perfectly. Another unexpected sign of care. Another check for abundance if you actively train your awareness to recognize abundance in a thoughtful gift, a neighbor's kindness, or an unexpected piece of good news. Your baseline state shifts from a place of waiting and needing to a place of having and appreciating, and whatever state you cultivate internally is exactly what you amplify externally now. You might be listening to this and thinking, that sounds wonderful for your specific lifestyle and goals, but my desires are completely different. How can this possibly apply to my situation? Let me tell you about a close friend of mine to show you how adaptable this principle truly is. Her greatest, deepest desire in life for consecutive years was to get married and build a traditional family. But her reality at the time was tough. She was completely single, hadn't been on a meaningful date in over a year, and felt deeply lonely. When she looked around her empty apartment, all she could see was what was missing. The idea of marking a check mark next to family felt like a cruel joke to her. We sat down one afternoon, drank some coffee, and completely reworked her nightly checklist. I told her we need to stop treating your family as a distant event that only starts when a ring is placed on your finger. Let's look at the essence of what a healthy family requires. We created a new metric for her. I said, from now on, every time you take a deliberate action to heal your own life, every time you go to the gym to strengthen your physical health, every time you sit through a tough therapy session to resolve childhood patterns, every time you invest time in reading a book that expands your emotional intelligence, you are going to put a check next to the word family. She was confused at first, but I explained the reality to her. When you do the heavy, uncomfortable work of healing your own mind and emotions today, you're actively ensuring that you won't bring old, toxic patterns into your future household. You're systematically becoming a wiser, more stable, and more loving partner for the person who is on their way to you. Your future marriage has already begun inside your current self-care. Her second major goal was to open her own private medical practice. She was still deep in her studies, exhausted, overwhelmed by exams, and feeling miles away from owning a building or managing staff. I told her, every single hour you spend sitting at that desk with intense focus, filtering out distractions, and mastering your material, put a check next to your clinic. That private practice isn't a building you buy in 10 years. It is being built right now by the discipline you are carving into your character today. She also desperately wanted to be a mother. She didn't have children of her own yet, but she had a young nephew whom she saw quite often. I suggested, every time you go over to visit your family, and you put down your phone, look that child in the eyes, and play with him on the floor with absolute, pure presence, or every night when you close your eyes and genuinely pray for his safety and happiness, mark a check next to motherhood. Because the patience, the deep empathy, and the unconditional protection you are cultivating in those moments is the exact same emotional currency you will use to raise your own children later. By shifting her perspective this way, she completely transformed her evenings. Instead of going to bed feeling isolated, sad, and empty, she went to sleep feeling like a woman who was actively constructing a rich, beautiful life. She realized she didn't have to wait for a child or a partner to experience the beauty of love and care. She was already surrounded by it, and she was already practicing it, and this is a crucial distinction to make. It is all about the intention, not the scale. If you set your daily goals based purely on the grand final outcome, if you decide that you will only allow yourself to feel successful, wealthy, or loved on the exact day you sign a contract or walk down an aisle, you are essentially telling your brain for the next 365 days straight that you are a failure. You are constantly affirming, I don't have it, I am empty, I'm waiting, and a state of consciousness rooted in lack can only attract more lack. It keeps you walking in circles in the desert. There is a powerful psychological and spiritual principle that states, for to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. When you utilize a tool like the nightly checklist to recognize that you already possess the fundamental essence of joy, abundance, peace, and purpose right now, in this very hour. You firmly ground yourself in the frequency of one who has. You stop operating as a desperate beggar pleading for scraps from life. You begin walking with the quiet, unshakable confidence of someone who knows the foundation is already laid, and when you learn to sustain that specific state of awareness not just on a Sunday afternoon when you're feeling inspired, but consistently through the long weeks, through the rainy days, through moments of grief, and through the mundane routines of everyday life, your external reality will eventually have no choice but to shift. The physical world is ultimately a mirror of your internal state. Opportunities, connections, and breakthroughs will begin to gravitate toward you naturally because your internal environment has become a match for them. And the most beautiful part of this entire journey is the day when that long-held dream finally materializes right in front of your eyes. You won't scream in frantic shock. You won't drop to your knees in desperate relief. Instead, you will look at it, you will breathe a deep, calm breath, you will smile, and you will say to yourself, I always knew you were coming. You arrived at the exact moment I had finally built the character to hold you without losing myself. You will look back at every delay, every closed door, and every mile of the wilderness, and you will realize that everything took place in absolute, flawless, perfect timing. I hope these reflections bring a sense of clarity, peace, and direction to whatever path you are currently navigating. If these concepts resonated with your life today, or if they helped shift a perspective that was keeping you stuck, please take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. I read through them deeply, and it brings an immense amount of joy to know that we are all exploring, growing, and uncovering these truths together. Take care of yourself. Keep moving forward one step at a time into the fog. And I will see you in our next conversation.